So what truly makes us human? I mean, how can we be capable of, incredible kindness one minute and then horrifying cruelty the next, sometimes from the very same
It's
impulses?
a huge question, isn't it? What really drives our best behaviors and our worst?
Exactly. And that's the fundamental question we're really diving into today. This deep dive is an exploration into this incredibly complex tapestry of human behavior. We're drawing from a whole stack of sources, focusing especially on the biological, psychological, evolutionary, and cultural influences that shape who we are.
Yeah, and our mission really is to try and uncover some of the surprising connections, the underlying principles that dictate why we do what we do. We want to give you a nuanced understanding, but, without getting totally bogged down in information overload.
Right, because it can feel overwhelming. So how are we approaching this?
Well, instead of looking at behavior in like isolated categories, this is biology, this is culture, we're breaking it down across time. A multi-layered, interconnected timeline.
Okay, interesting.
Like, we'll start with the milliseconds. Right before you do something, what's happening in your brain right then.
Huh.
Then we zoom out, minutes, hours before hormones, senses, then weeks, years development, experience, all the way back to influences from millions of years of evolution.
Ah, I see. So the idea is to show how it's all connected.
Precisely. How deeply intertwined all these factors are. A single action isn't just one thing, it's the culmination of everything that came before it.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's try and unpack that with maybe a familiar thought experiment. Like, why did the chicken cross the road?
Classic, okay.
Right. So if you ask, say, a psychoneuroendocrinologist that's someone studying brain hormone behavior links, quite a mouthful.
It is.
They might say, well, because circulating estrogen levels in that hen acted on a specific brain area, making her respond to the rooster signal.
Okay, makes sense from that perspective.
Then you ask a bioengineer, they might say, it's because the long bone in her leg acts as a fulcrum against her pelvis, letting him move forward fast.
Also true, a mechanical explanation.
And the evolutionary biologist, they'd say, because over millions of years, hens that responded to those signals when fertile left more copies of their genes, so it became innate.
Right, so you've got hormones, mechanics, evolution, all giving perfectly valid answers.
Exactly. And that's the crucial insight, isn't it? When you explain a behavior using just one of those scientific lenses, you're actually implicitly bringing in all the others.
Yes, that's the absolute key takeaway here. Any single explanation is just the end point of countless influences before it. Like you said, if it's a brain chemical release,
Uh-huh.
well, that release was probably influenced by a hormone secreted earlier that day. And that hormone level might be affected by the environment the chicken or the person grew up in, which, made their brain more sensitive to certain triggers.
So it's like dominoes falling, stretching back in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all interconnected. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Mm.
That's probably the most important idea we'll cover.
And it's easy to get stuck in just one explanation, right? I mean, historically, people have done that.
Oh, absolutely. Think about John Watson, the behaviorist. He was so focused on the environment, famously claiming he could turn any baby into any kind of specialist, totally ignoring, innate potential,
Right, just nurture, no nature.
which we now know is, well, way too simplistic.
Too simple. We know now that our basic mental life depends on our brain synapses working properly. And mental disorders often arise when those connections, those synapses, are disrupted.
So understanding the brain has to be foundational.
It really does. Because at our core, biologically speaking, we are animals. We're apes, primates, mammals. We share so much.
Like what, specifically?
Well, when you get scared, you secrete the same stress hormone as a fish that's being bullied by a bigger fish. Seriously. The brain chemicals involved in pleasure. Same ones in us as in a capybara enjoying a snack.
A capybara, okay.
Yeah. And even basic neuron function, how nerve cells fire, is conserved across huge evolutionary distances, from us down to, like, brine shrimp.
Wow. And you mentioned something, the Wellesley effect. Ah, yes. That's the observation, though it's debated that women living closely together, like college roommates, might subconsciously influence each other's menstrual cycles. It's also seen in rats. Just another little hint at these subtle biological connections.
Okay, so our shared biology is a starting point, but human behavior is obviously more complex. We need to look at our brains, right? And you mentioned layers.
Yes, the layered brain model is a really helpful way to think about it. It's like evolutionary additions. Layer 1 is the oldest, the reptilian core, you might say. Humans, geckos, we all have it.
And it does.
Automatic stuff. Regulatory functions. Body temperature, hunger signals. The basic stress response, if you, say, cut yourself. stuff you don't consciously control.
Okay, autopilot, layer 2.
Layer 2 expanded hugely in mammals. This is often called the limbic system. Think emotions. So layer 2 takes input, maybe sees something scary, and sends commands down to layer 1.
So like if I see a snake, layer 2 feels fear and tells layer 1 to make my heart pound.
Exactly. Or feeling sad. Layer 2 might trigger that craving for comfort food that's a layer 2 to layer 1 connection. Shivering with fear or excitement, same thing.
Got it. And then layer 3, the human bit.
That's the frontal cortex. For ages, people
Wow.
thought it was just the highbrow rational part, planning, logic, abstract thought. But a neuroscientist named Walanada had a huge breakthrough in the 60s.
What did he find?
He showed just how deeply interconnected the frontal cortex is with that emotional limbic system, layer 2. He even called the frontal cortex a quasi-member of the limbic system. It's not separate. It's constantly talking to our emotions.
Wow. So reason and emotion aren't really separate warring factions in our heads.
Not at all. They're profoundly linked.
Yeah.
And a great example of this is the amygdala.
Ah, yes, the amygdala, often linked to aggression, right?
It definitely has a clear link. Studies show if you lesion it or quiet it down pharmacologically in animals, aggression tends to decrease. Stimulate it, and aggression can increase. In humans, brain scans show it lights up when we see things that make us angry. Stimulating it during brain surgery can even provoke feelings of rage.
Okay, so it's the aggression center.
Well, here's the really fascinating twist. While it's linked to aggression, its primary job seems to be processing fear and anxiety.
Wait, so the part of the brain most involved in being afraid is also heavily involved in being aggressive.
Exactly. Think about it. Fear often precedes aggression, right? Defensive aggression. The amygdala is central to learning what's scary. A bad experience strengthens those connections.
But can we unlearn fear?
Yes. And this is where our human edge comes in, that frontal cortex. It's absolutely vital for actively unlearning fear. It's not passive forgetting. The frontal cortex actively helps build new, non-scary associations. It inhibits the amygdala's initial fear response. It's like saying, okay, amygdala, calm down. This situation is actually safe now.
That's a really active process then, overriding the initial fear.
Very active. It requires that frontal cortex engagement.
And this interplay, does it affect our decisions too, like everyday choices?
Absolutely. Take the ultimatum game. You know the one. One person gets, say, $100, proposes a split with a second person. The second person can accept or reject. If they reject, nobody gets anything.
Right. Logically, you should accept any offer, even a tiny one. But people don't.
Exactly. Rejecting an unfair offer, like $90 for them, $10 for you, is often a purely emotional decision. It feels wrong. You want to punish the unfairness. And guess what? The more the amygdala activates in the person receiving the offer, the more likely they are to reject it.
So anger, maybe processed by the amygdala, drives the rejection.
Seems like it. And even more telling, people with damage to the amygdala, they tend to be, well, unusually generous in the game, and they don't reject unfair offers nearly as much.
Wow. So the amygdala isn't just about aggression or raw fear. It's also involved in that sense of fairness or maybe unfairness detection?
It seems crucial for that kind of social-emotional judgment, knowing when something feels off or unjust.
Okay, fascinating. Now, zooming out a bit, you mentioned influences minutes to hours before an action. Hormones, senses.
Right, and things happening below our conscious radar. Let's start with the dopamine system, often called the pleasure chemical.
Yeah, because drugs like cocaine or heroin release dopamine, right?
They do, in the brain's reward pathway. But here's the crucial insight from recent research. Dopamine seems to be less about the pleasure of the reward itself and more about the anticipation of it, the motivation, the pursuit, the expectation.
So the pleasure is in the chase, not the catch.
In large part, yes. The dopamine system fires up when you're working towards a goal, especially if the reward is uncertain.
How does that play out?
Think about pathological gamblers. Their dopamine systems go absolutely wild during a near miss on a slot machine. That almost won feeling is incredibly potent dopamine-wise. It's the ambiguity, the possibility that keeps them hooked, more than the actual wins sometimes.
That makes sense. And you mentioned our frontal cortex weighing rewards.
Yes, especially short-term versus long-term. People who tend to be more impatient often show brain activity suggesting they sort of discount the value of a future reward. It seems less valuable because that's delayed, and they might overestimate how long the wait feels.
So that immediate, smaller reward just feels much more appealing in the moment.
Exactly. The frontal cortex isn't evaluating it the same way.
Okay. What about other systems? Serotonin.
Serotonin generally helps with impulse control and goal-directed behavior. And one of the most consistent findings in this area is that lower serotonin levels are often linked with impulsive antisocial behavior, including aggression.
So low serotonin impulsive aggression, is it that simple?
No, definitely not that simple. It's a reliable correlation, but correlation isn't causation. And as we'll get into later, the genetics around serotonin are really complex. There's a variant, sometimes called the warrior gene in the media.
Oh, I've heard of that. MAOA.
That's the one, the MAOAL variant. Its effects are heavily dependent on environmental factors, especially childhood experiences. But it's complex enough that it has actually been argued successfully in some court cases to potentially lessen sentences for impulsive violence. The legal system is really grappling with this stuff.
Wow. Okay. So internal chemistry matters, but you also mentioned unconscious triggers, things outside us.
Yes, and this is mind-blowing stuff. Even really fleeting sensory input, stuff you're not even aware you saw or heard, can powerfully change your behavior.
Like subliminal advertising, is that real?
Well, the classic drink Coke flashed on screen is probably overblown, but subtle cues, definitely. For instance, show someone a very quick flash of a face from a different racial group too fast to consciously register, and their amygdala might activate.
An automatic threat response.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. If you show that same face long enough for them to consciously process it, parts of the frontal cortex engage and seem to inhibit that initial amygdala response. It's like the executive brain stepping in.
So consciousness allows for regulation of that automatic bias.
It seems so. And some cues are surprisingly simple. You mentioned pictures of eyes earlier.
Yeah, at a bus stop.
Right. Putting up a large picture of eyes near a litter bin significantly increased cleanup. In a coffee room with an honor system for payment, a picture of eyes nearby tripled the amount of money people paid.
Just eyes. Wow. Why?
The unconscious feeling of being watched, probably. It triggers our social monitoring systems. Even language works unconsciously. Call an economic game the Wall Street game, and people play more selfishly than if you call the exact same game the community game.
Same rules, different name, different behavior?
Totally different behavior. Simple word primes, flashing words related to cooperation or competition can shift how pro-social you act moments later without you having any idea why. Even really subtle things like having an American flag hanging in the room or just wearing your favorite team sweatshirt can subtly influence attitudes and actions.
It's amazing how much is going on beneath the surface. What about things like the bystander effect? More people means less helping.
Well, it's nuanced. That classic effect diffusion of responsibility seems to hold true, mostly in situations where helping is just an inconvenience, like picking up dropped papers. But in genuinely dangerous situations, research actually suggests the opposite.
Really? More people means more helping.
Often, yes, possibly because of reputation. If there's a large crowd witnessing a dangerous event, stepping up to help looks heroic. More witnesses means your bravery is noted.
Interesting. So the stakes change the dynamic.
They seem to. And this idea of environmental cues influencing behavior connects to something like the broken window theory.
Ah, the policing strategy. Fixing broken windows, cleaning graffiti reduces serious crime.
That's the premise. The idea, popularized in New York City in the 90s, is that visible signs of disorder signal that anything goes, which encourages more serious crime. So zero tolerance for minor stuff supposedly creates an atmosphere of order that deters major crime.
Did it work?
Well, crime did drop dramatically in NYC, and similar results were seen in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, where crime dropped specifically in the target areas. But, and it's a big but.
There's always a but in behavioral science, isn't there?
Pretty much. Critics point out that many studies lacked proper control groups. Crime was already declining nationally during that period for various reasons. So it's really hard to definitively say the broken window policing alone caused the drop. It's likely part of a much more complex picture.
Right. Okay, let's zoom out again. Weeks to years before an action. Hormones again, but maybe acting over longer time scales. Genes, development.
Exactly. And let's tackle a big one, testosterone. Hugely misunderstood hormone.
The aggression hormone, right? That's the stereotype.
Total stereotype, mostly. It actually has far less to do with aggression levels than people think. Within the normal range of testosterone levels in humans, individual differences don't reliably predict who will be more aggressive.
So someone with higher T isn't necessarily more aggressive.
Not necessarily at all. Here's the crucial nuance. Testosterone doesn't invent aggression. It's more facilitatory. It makes individuals more sensitive to triggers for aggression especially if they're already prone to it. It lowers the threshold for an aggressive response to a provocation.
Okay, so it amplifies a pre-existing tendency, maybe.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And here's something even more surprising. When testosterone levels rise during, say, a status challenge,
Yeah, like a competition.
right,
Right.
that rise doesn't automatically increase aggression. It seems to increase whatever behavior is needed to maintain status in that specific context.
Whoa, wait. So if being cooperative and generous is how you gain status in a particular situation.
Then testosterone could actually promote pro-social behavior in that moment.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining status, using whatever tools work in that social environment.
That completely flips the script on testosterone. It's not just macho aggression juice.
Not at all. And get this, studies have shown that if people believe they've been given testosterone, even if it's just a placebo, they might act more unfairly in certain games. But in other contexts, that same belief can promote honesty.
So the expectation, the social meaning we attach to it, matters hugely.
Hugely. Context is everything.
Okay. What about other hormones? Oxytocin, vasopressin, the cuddle hormones?
Yeah, they're famous for their role in bonding mother-infant pair bonding in couples. They reduce stress, foster trust, encourage cooperation. All sounds lovely, right?
Sounds great. What's the catch? I feel a catch coming.
There's a big one. These hormones seem to increase prosociality, trust, cooperation, but primarily toward members of your own group, your yes.
And towards them, people outside the group.
Towards them, oxytocin can actually increase suspicion, defensiveness, ethnocentrism, even xenophobia. It's not a universal make everyone nice hormone, it's a parochial one. It enhances the boundary between us and them.
So it strengthens in-group bonds, potentially at the expense of out-group relations.
Precisely. And even its pro-social effects depend on context and culture. How oxytocin affects whether you seek social support when stressed. It varies between, say, Americans and East Asians. It depends on your genes, your culture, whether you're actually stressed. It's incredibly complex. No hormone is a simple button push for behavior.
Right. Always interactions. What about stress itself, long-term stress?
Chronic stress is a major player. It's just corrosive. It has so many negative effects. Metabolic problems like increased risk of diabetes, suppressed immune function, making you more vulnerable to illness, and crucially for behavior, it impairs the functioning of the frontal cortex.
The part we need for good decisions and impulse control.
Exactly. Working memory suffers, impulse control goes down, executive function gets worse. Essentially, stress makes it harder for your frontal cortex to regulate your emotional responses, including those coming from the amygdala.
So stress makes us more reactive, less thoughtful.
In many ways, yes. And here's something counterintuitive. Stress can sometimes foster aggression, because aggression can temporarily reduce the feeling of stress.
Wait, how does that work?
It's called displacement aggression. Think of a baboon. A high-ranking male loses a fight, feels stressed and agitated. He can't safely attack the winner, so what does he do? He turns and bites a lower-ranking baboon who wasn't involved.
Oh, taking it out on someone else.
Exactly. It discharges the tension. It actually lowers his stress hormone levels momentarily. And in humans, stress also biases us towards selfishness, especially in really emotionally charged moral dilemmas. The higher the stress hormones, the more likely we are to choose the self-interested option.
Okay, stress is bad. Got it. Let's talk about the brain change and plasticity.
Yes, brain plasticity, it's incredible. For the longest time, the dogma in neuroscience was no new neurons in the adult brain. What you're born with is what you get.
I remember hearing that, but it's wrong.
Completely wrong. A revolutionary discovery back in the 1960s by Joseph Altman and Gopal Das showed that adult brains do generate new neurons in certain areas, like the hippocampus, which is crucial for learning and memory. It's called neurogenesis.
So our brains can make new parts, even as adults.
They can. And it's not just new neurons. Learning itself changes the brain constantly. When you learn something, the connections between specific neurons get stronger. It's a process called long-term potentiation, LTP. Like making a path clearer the more you walk it.
That's how memories form, stronger connections.
That's the core idea. But chronic stress, it does the opposite in some key areas. It can cause the branches of neurons, the dendrites in the frontal cortex, to actually retract, losing connections, losing synapses. This directly impairs decision-making and cognitive flexibility.
Wow, stress literally prunes back our thinking capacity.
It can, yes. And speaking of brain development, the frontal cortex is famously the last part of the brain to fully mature. It's not really finished wiring until your mid-20s.
Mid-20s, that explains a lot about teenagers.
Yeah, it certainly helps. And the maturation isn't about getting more neurons. It's actually about pruning away unused connections to make the remaining ones faster and more efficient. It's like neural Darwinism's survival of the busiest pathways.
So less is more, in a
Yeah.
way. More efficient.
Exactly. This pruning process is why adolescents might struggle with things like detecting sarcasm or irony, or fully grasping complex social nuances. Their frontal cortex is still under construction, optimizing itself.
So experience shapes that final wiring, which brings us to early experiences.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Think of Harry Harlow's classic, if ethically troubling, monkey experiments. He raised infant monkeys in isolation with wire or cloth surrogate mothers.
Right, they preferred the cloth mother for comfort.
They did. But what was also striking was that when these isolated monkeys grew up, they could do normal monkey behaviors, grooming, mating attempts, but often at completely the wrong time, or directed at the wrong individual, or in the wrong place.
So they knew the what, but not the when or where or who.
Exactly. What Harlow showed was that mothers and peers don't just teach the behaviors themselves, they teach the crucial context. When is this behavior appropriate?
That makes sense. And what about negative early experiences? Childhood adversity.
The impacts can be severe and long-lasting. Just observing violence as a child, for example, can impair concentration and impulse control. It doubles the likelihood of committing serious violence later in life and increases the risk of adult depression, anxiety, and aggression.
Supering. Does parenting style play a big role?
Consistently, yes. There are different models, but Diana Baumrein's framework is influential. Authoritative parents, high warmth, high control limits. Authoritarian, low warmth, high control. Permissive, high warmth, low control. Later researchers added neglectful, low warmth, low control. These styles reliably predict different developmental outcomes for kids. It shows how interaction patterns literally sculpt the developing brain and behavior.
And this connects to genetics too, right? You mentioned epigenetics.
Yes, epigenetics is a fascinating field. It's basically about how the environment can change how your genes are expressed, turning them on or off, without changing the underlying DNA sequence itself. Think of it like dimmer switches on your genes.
So the environment can flip these switches.
Exactly. A groundbreaking study by Michael Meany in 2004 looked at rats. He found that rat mothers who were highly attentive, lots of licking and grooming, actually changed the epigenetic markers on stress response genes in their pups' brains.
So the mother's behavior altered the pup's gene expression.
Yes, making them less stressed, more resilient as adults, and even more amazing, that epigenetic pattern was then passed down. Female pups who received high nurturing grew up to be high-nurturing mothers themselves.
Wow. So nurture becomes nature in a way, passed down epigenetically. What about humans?
The implications are huge. It helps explain things like the warrior gene, that MAOAL variant we mentioned. Research strongly suggests that having that gene variant only increases the risk of aggression or antisocial behavior if the person also experienced significant childhood adversity, like abuse or neglect.
So it's a gene-environment interaction. The gene creates a potential vulnerability, but the environment pulls the trigger.
That's a perfect way to put it. The gene alone isn't destiny. It depends. And this is true for most complex behaviors. They're polygenic, meaning influenced by hundreds or thousands of genes, each having a tiny effect. And the effect of any one gene almost always depends crucially on the environment. It depends is kind of the mantra of behavioral genetics.
Right. Nature and nurture interacting constantly. Okay, let's zoom out even further. Centuries, millennia, culture, evolution.
Big picture time. Culture isn't just behavior. It's the shared ideas, values, symbols, technologies passed down through generations. And it profoundly shapes how we think and act, sometimes in ways we don't even realize.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about traditional ways of making a living. In parts of East Asia, wet rice farming requires huge collective effort, building terraces, managing irrigation systems. This fosters a more collectivist culture, emphasizing group harmony and interdependence.
Makes sense. Lots of cooperation needed.
Contrast that with, say, traditional herding in some solitary environments like parts of Turkey. It fosters more individualism, self-reliance, and you can find these cultural differences even between groups with the same language, religion, and genetics, just based on their historical subsistence patterns.
So how we lived shaped our cultural values.
Deeply. And cultures aren't static, of course. They evolve. They can even be influenced quite rapidly by cues. Just priming someone with collectivist versus individualist ideas can briefly change how they process information.
What about societal factors like inequality?
Inequality is a huge societal stressor. Studies across countries and even within countries show that higher income inequality generally correlates with lower social capital, less trust, less community involvement. And it tends to fuel violence, but often is violence among the poor targeting other vulnerable people.
That displacement aggression pattern again, frustration directed downwards.
It looks a lot like that, yes. When status and resources are scarce and unfairly distributed, it creates tension that can erupt, often towards those perceived as rivals for those limited resources.
Okay. And religion, how does that fit into the cultural picture?
Religion is fascinatingly complex here. One influential idea is about big gods. The concept of powerful, moralizing deities who watch over people and punish wrongdoing. These tend to emerge historically in larger, more anonymous societies.
Why then?
Because in small bands, everyone knows everyone. Reputation keeps people in line. In large societies with strangers, belief in a watchful, punishing God can promote cooperation and honesty, acting as a kind of supernatural surveillance.
So it helps enforce social norms. But religion is also linked to conflict, obviously.
Definitely a double-edged sword. Research suggests it's not necessarily belief itself, but communal religiosity, things like frequent attendance at group services, strong identification with a religious group that more strongly predicts hostility towards outgroups. That shared ritual and identity seems to strengthen the U.S. boundary.
Right, reinforcing the in-group. What about violence further back, prehistoric times?
Oh, that's a hotbed of debate. You have cases like the Yanomama people in the Amazon, famously described by Napoleon Chagnon as the fierce people, due to high rates of lethal violence among males competing for status and mates.
But that portrayal is controversial, isn't it?
Highly controversial. Critics argued Chagnon's work might have exaggerated the violence or didn't fully account for the impact of outside contact. And sadly, portraying indigenous groups as inherently violent has historically been used to justify colonization, land theft, and forced assimilation. It's a really fraught area.
So what do we know about violence way back in hunter-gatherer times?
It's complicated. The older view was maybe romanticized, small bands, peaceful, rare violence. Then came a revisionist view, pointing to archaeological evidence suggesting much higher rates, maybe 15% of deaths, due to warfare in some prehistoric populations.
15%? That's huge.
It is. But again, it depends. It likely varied hugely. We need to distinguish between different types of hunter-gatherers. Small, nomadic bands constantly on the move are different from larger, more sedentary, complex hunter-gatherers who settled in resource-rich areas and might have defended territories.
Like the Natarek site in Kenya, that massacre.
Exactly. Nataruk involved more sedentary fisher-gatherers. They had resources worth fighting for, perhaps. Nomadic hunter-gatherers, the kind most like our deep ancestors, seem to have had different dynamics.
Like cooperation. How did that work?
They relied heavily on indirect reciprocity. Sharing meat after a successful hunt wasn't just charity, it was like banking favors. You share today when you have plenty, knowing others will share with you tomorrow when you might come back empty-handed. It builds strong social bonds against future uncertainty.
And how did they handle rule breakers, people who didn't cooperate?
They had sophisticated social regulation. Gossip, ridicule, ostracism were common tools. But for really serious transgressions, repeated murder, extreme selfishness that threatened the group, many hunter-gatherer societies practiced collective execution. The group would decide together that someone was too dangerous and act collectively to remove them. Group cohesion was paramount.
Wow. Okay, turning to evolution itself. The principles driving all this over millennia.
Right. And first, let's clear up a common misconception. Evolution isn't just survival of the fittest. It's fundamentally about reproduction. Passing on copies of your genes is the name of the game.
So survival is just a means to that end.
Pretty much. Which explains things like antagonistic pleiotropy. That's where a gene might give you a reproductive advantage early in life, but cause problems later on, like maybe promoting rapid cell growth, good for fertility, but increasing cancer risk decades later. Evolution favors the early advantage if it leads to more offspring.
Okay, so it's about gene transmission, which leads to kin selection, helping relatives.
Exactly. Richard Dawkins' selfish gene idea helps here. Genes want to make copies of themselves. Helping your identical twin reproduce is almost as good genetically as reproducing yourself. Helping a full sibling is half as good, and so on. This explains why altruism towards relatives is so common across nature.
But it's not always harmonious, even with kin. You mentioned parent-offspring conflict.
Right. Think about weaning. A mother baboon might want to wean her infant sooner to save resources for her next pregnancy. The infant wants to keep nursing longer. Their genetic interests aren't perfectly aligned. They only share 50% of genes, leading to conflict.
Makes sense. What about helping non-relatives?
That's where reciprocal altruism comes in. Robert Trevor's idea, often summed up as tit for tat, I scratch your back, you scratch mine later. It works well when individuals interact repeatedly and can remember who cooperates and who defects.
So reputation matters there too.
Hugely. But what about cooperation on a larger scale? Between groups?
Yeah.
There's the idea of multi-level selection. The argument is that competition between groups can be a powerful force driving cooperation within groups. If groups of cooperators consistently outcompete groups of selfish individuals, say in warfare or resource acquisition, then genes promoting within group altruism can spread. Economist Samuel Bowles called intergroup conflict altruism's midwife.
So group success selects for individual cooperation within the group.
That's the idea. It's still debated, but it's influential.
And humans. We seem like a puzzle from this evolutionary perspective.
We really are. We're genetically equidistant from chimps, more aggressive, male-dominated, and bonobos, more peaceful, female-dominated, lots of sexual behavior to ease tension. We show traits of both. We are considered mildly polygynous. Some males have multiple partners, historically fitting some standard evolutionary models. But lots of humans choose not to reproduce at all. We adopt unrelated children. We perform extreme altruism for strangers, sometimes sacrificing our lives. These things are harder to explain purely through individual or kin selection.
What about things like the Cinderella effect? Step-parents being more dangerous.
Yes. Daly and Wilson's controversial finding that stepchildren are statistically at much higher risk of abuse and homicide from stepparents than children living with biological parents. It's often cited as grim evidence for kin selection, less investment in non-genetic offspring.
But it is controversial.
Very. Critics raise important points about confounding factors: poverty, stress, the circumstances that lead to stepfamilies forming. Also, detection bias abuse by stepparents might be reported more readily. It's far from a simple genetic explanation.
Okay. You mentioned a historical example, Pavlik Morozov.
A chilling story from the Soviet era. Pavlik was officially celebrated as a young pioneer hero who denounced his own father to the authorities during Stalin's brutal collectivization campaign and was supposedly killed by relatives for it.
Denouncing his own father.
Exactly. But the telling detail is that Stalin himself, the architect of that system, demanding state loyalty above all, reportedly reacted with disgust, calling Pavlik a little pig for betraying his family. It shows just how deep that kin preference runs, even overriding powerful ideology.
Wow. And hunter-gatherer cooperation, was it mostly kin?
Actually, no. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer bands show that, on average, only about 40% of the individuals in a band are close blood relatives. So the huge amount of their daily cooperation must have relied on reciprocal altruism and other mechanisms among non-kin.
So both kin and non-kin cooperation were vital. What about the pace of evolution? Is it always slow and gradual?
Not necessarily. Darwin emphasized gradualism, but Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge proposed punctuated equilibrium, long periods of stability, stasis, punctuated by relatively short bursts of rapid change, often driven by major environmental shifts or new opportunities.
And do we see that rapid change in humans?
Oh, definitely. Even in the last 10,000 years since agriculture. The rapid spread of lactase persistence, the ability for adults to digest milk in populations that domesticated cattle, is a classic example. Changes in genes related to disease resistance, skin pigmentation, even brain development like the ASTM gene, show recent rapid evolution.
Which leads to debates about why these traits evolved, right?
Yeah.
Adaptationism.
Exactly. Adaptationism is the approach of assuming most traits are evolutionary adaptations and then trying to figure out what problem they evolved to solve. Critics sometimes call these explanations just-so stories, arguing they can be speculative and hard to test.
Like Rudyard Kipling's stories, how the leopard got his spots.
Precisely. And these debates aren't just academic exercises. They often get tangled up in ideological battles about human nature, social policy, and what's considered natural or inevitable.
Okay. Let's move to one of the most powerful and often problematic human tendencies, us versus them.
Absolutely fundamental and incredibly fast. Our brains categorize people into us and them with stunning automaticity. Remember the amygdala activating to other race faces in just 50 milliseconds?
Before conscious thought, basically.
Pretty much. It's a deep-seated process, and it's not uniquely human.
Animals do it too.
Oh, yeah. Chimps patrol their borders and can attack and kill chimps from neighboring groups. Monkeys have been shown in labs to quickly form negative associations with images of monkeys from rival groups, associating them with unpleasant things like, believe it or not, pictures of spiders.
Yuck. Spiders.
Uh,
Okay. So what's special about human use them?
for us, usness creates powerful feelings of obligation, trust, reciprocity. We're automatically more generous, more cooperative, more forgiving towards in-group members, even when the U.S. is totally arbitrary, like being assigned to the same meaningless group color in an experiment or rooting for the same sports team.
Sports teams, that's fungible, right? You could switch teams.
Exactly. Those group boundaries can be flexible. But other groups are non-fungible. Think religious groups, ethnic groups, national groups, often tied to sacred values that people are unwilling to compromise on. Those use-them lines are much harder to cross.
And how do we typically view them?
Depressingly consistently, unfortunately. Across cultures, we tend to unconsciously perceive outgroup members, especially males, as more threatening, angrier, less trustworthy. Studies show people might misjudge an ambiguous facial expression as angry if it's on an other race face.
And you mentioned the baseball fans underestimating distance.
Yeah, making the rival stadium seem psychologically closer, therefore more threatening. Our perception of the world is literally warped by these use-them biases.
Okay, this is sounding pretty bleak. Is there any hope? Can these boundaries change?
Yes, this is crucial. These categories are powerful, but they are often malleable and reversible. Remember the study where focusing on a non-race category, like food preferences, stopped the amygdala activating to other race faces?
Right, recategorization, seeing them as an individual foodie, not just them.
Exactly. You shift the category, you shift the brain's response. And history is full of examples. Think of immigrant soldiers fighting alongside native-born soldiers. In wars, finding common ground in a shared identity as soldiers, overriding previous ethnic or national differences.
Like the Irish in the U.S. Civil War.
A perfect example. Or that amazing anecdote from World War II. A captured British commando and the German general interrogating him discover they both love the Roman poet Horace and end up reciting verses together. Finding shared humanity can bridge enormous divides.
So common ground matters. Do we feel the same way about all thems?
No, definitely not. Susan Fisk's stereotype content model is really useful here. It suggests we categorize groups along two main axes: warmth, are they friendly, trustworthy, and competence, are they capable, skillful.
So different groups fall into different quadrants.
Right. Think about stereotypes. Maybe the elderly are seen as high warmth, low competence. A rival business group might be seen as low warmth, high competence. And these perceptions can shift dramatically over time. Think Made in Japan. It went from meaning low quality, low competence to high quality, high competence.
And even enemies can develop respect.
Sometimes, yes, especially combatants who face similar dangers. Think of medieval knights following codes of chivalry or soldiers in the WWI trenches, sometimes developing a grudging respect for the bravery and skill of the guys in the opposite trench, even while trying to kill them.
Yeah.
Shared experience can create a strange bond.
Individual differences must matter too. Some people are more prone to prejudice.
Yes. Personality traits like social dominance orientation, basically, a preference for group-based hierarchy and inequality, and right-wing authoritarianism, valuing obedience, conformity, and aggression towards outgroups, consistently predict higher levels of prejudice and less empathy for them.
And hierarchy itself, how do our brains handle status?
Our brains are exquisitely sensitive to status differences. Detecting subtle cues of dominance and submission is crucial for navigating social groups. In fact, some argue that the massive expansion of our frontal cortex was partly driven by the computational demands of managing complex social hierarchies and relationships.
It takes brain power to play the social game.
A lot of it. And there's even a middle management paradox. People with high job demands but little control or autonomy often suffer the worst stress-related health problems. Being caught in the middle of a hierarchy can be uniquely stressful.
And does this affect who we choose as leaders? Implicitly.
It seems to. Remember the study showing people prefer older, more masculine-looking leaders during wartime scenarios, but younger, more feminine faces during peacetime. Our unconscious biases about competence and threat influence our choices.
And politics. Brain differences between left and right.
This is a fascinating and sometimes controversial area. Some research suggests differences in intellectual style. People identifying as politically right-leaning may, on average, report being more uncomfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, perhaps relying more on gut feelings. Left-leaners might show more integrative complexity on average, more willingness to consider multiple perspectives and change their minds with more information.
That's style. What about actual brain function?
Well, hold on to your hat for this one. A study on judicial rulings found that judges were dramatically more likely to grant parole right after taking a break. like lunch, compared to right before one.
Wait, hungry judges are harsher judges. Seriously.
The data was striking. Parole rates plummeted towards zero as the judges got hungrier, then shot back up after they ate. It suggests basic biological states can unconsciously sway even highly complex reasoned decisions. It's unsettling.
That is unsettling. What about brain structure?
Some neuroimaging studies have suggested, on average, potential differences. For example, liberals might show a slightly larger anterior cingulate cortex, an area involved in detecting errors and managing conflict, perhaps related to that higher tolerance for ambiguity. Conservatives might show, on average, a slightly enlarged amygdala, potentially linked to heightened sensitivity to threats.
But these are averages, right? Not predictive for individuals.
Absolutely the crucial point. These are average tendencies in groups with huge overlap. You can't scan someone's brain and know their politics. And interestingly, studies also often find right-leaners report higher levels of happiness. Why? Maybe simpler answers are more comforting. Maybe it's system justification, being happier with the status quo. It's a complex.
Okay. And conformity, obeying authority.
Deeply ingrained behaviors. We see social learning and behavioral contagion in many animals and very young human children. We're built to copy others.
And the classic studies, Ash, Milgram, Zimbardo.
Yes, the trifecta of social psychology showing the power of the situation. Ash's line experiment showed people conforming to a clearly wrong group judgment. Milgram's obedience study showed ordinary people willing to deliver apparently harmful electric shocks under orders from an authority figure. Or in Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, well, it dramatically, though controversially, showed how quickly people can adopt assigned roles, even abusive ones.
What's the main takeaway from those?
It's both sobering and maybe a bit hopeful. The sobering part. A much higher percentage of normal, decent people than we'd like to believe will yield to situational pressures and do terrible things. We overestimate our own resistance.
The hopeful part.
The hopeful part is that the presence of just one other person dissenting, one person pushing back against the pressure, can be incredibly powerful. It can break the spell and galvanize others to resist too. Also, anonymity is a key factor.
So?
Making people feel anonymous, like wearing hoods, KKK, or uniforms and helmets, stormtroopers, facilitates de-individuation. You feel less personally responsible, making horrific acts easier. And often, when people do finally resist, when their conscience draws a line, it's often at a seemingly arbitrary point. It's not always a grand principle. It might be an implicit emotional trigger. Seeing a victim's face remind you of someone you love.
So much is happening beneath conscious reasoning, which brings us nicely to morality itself.
Right. How do we decide what's right and wrong? A lot of it seems anchored in emotion and social intuition. Many basic moral judgments, like harming others is bad, feel intuitively obvious across cultures.
But we're not always consistent, are we?
Far from it. We are masters of making exceptions for ourselves. Oh, my situation had special circumstances. And brain imaging suggests we might even use different neural circuits when judging our own moral failings compared to judging someone else's.
A built-in hypocrisy circuit.
Yeah, maybe something like that. And cultures differ too. For example, societies with more market integration, more anonymous economic interactions, tend to show fairer play in economic games and more willingness to punish cheaters, even at a personal cost.
Why would markets do that?
Perhaps because successful market interactions require trust and adherence to impartial fairness norms among strangers. Then you have honor cultures, often historically rooted in pastoralist societies, where reputation and retaliation were crucial for protecting resources, like livestock, in environments with weak state control.
Explaining higher violence rates in some regions, like the American South.
That's one prominent theory, yes. The historical emphasis on defending one's honor, sometimes through violence, persists culturally. And there's the classic distinction between shame and guilt.
Shame is public, guilt is internal.
Broadly, yes. Shame cultures, often more collectivist, emphasize external perception, what others think. Guilt cultures, often more individualist, emphasize internalizing rules and feeling bad when you know you've transgressed, even if no one else does. But shame can still be useful today. Think of public shaming for bad behavior, like that UCLA parking scandal where wealthy students misused disabled placards. Public outcry filled a gap where legal penalties were maybe insufficient.
Okay. What about moral philosophy in action? Deontology versus consequentialism.
Means versus ends. Is an action wrong regardless of the outcome, deontology, or does the outcome justify the action, consequentialism. The famous trolley problem experiments explore this.
Where you choose whether to slip a switch to divert a trolley, killing one person to save five.
Right. Or the variation where you have to physically push someone onto the track to save the five. People react differently. What these studies show is that many, maybe most people, aren't consistently one or the other. They're context dependent.
So our moral philosophy shifts depending on the situation.
It seems so. Philosopher Joshua Green argues our deontological, rights-based morality often stems from gut feelings, emotional reactions. It just feels wrong. While consequentialist reasoning involves more deliberate cognitive calculation. Often, our sense of moral rights boils down to, as Green puts it, I can't tell you exactly why, but this is just how things should be done. It's intuition-driven.
What about deception? Lying?
It's not uniquely human. We see tactical deception in other primates. A lower-ranking capuchin monkey might give a false predator alarm call just to distract a dominant monkey and steal its food.
Clever monkeys. And humans.
We're masters, of course. Interestingly, studies show higher rates of cheating on tasks in countries with higher levels of perceived government corruption, suggesting norms of dishonesty can permeate a society. Brain-wise, parts of our frontal cortex are active during strategic lying, while another area, the anterior cingulate cortex again, seems to monitor the conflict between the truth and the lie.
So it takes effort to lie convincingly.
It does. Which brings us back to an older idea, virtue ethics. Maybe the ideal isn't constantly struggling to do the right thing, but cultivating character so that doing the right thing becomes automatic, the easier path. The feeling isn't, I must resist temptation, but that's just not who I am.
Making virtue the default setting.
Exactly. Now, closely related to morality is empathy feeling with another person.
Can animals feel empathy?
There's evidence for precursors. Remember the mouse study. One mouse in pain causes a nearby cage mate to become more sensitive to pain themselves. It's like a basic contagion of feeling.
And human empathy develops.
Absolutely. It matures throughout childhood and adolescence, starting with feeling another's physical pain, expanding to understanding their emotional pain, feeling moral indignation on their behalf, and eventually sophisticated perspective-taking, seeing the world through their eyes. Different brain regions come online for these different layers of empathy.
But empathy isn't always easy, is it?
No, it has a cognitive cost. It takes mental effort, especially for abstract suffering, like statistics about famine, or for people far away, or even for people we dislike. This helps explain compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue.
And why we might donate more to save one identified child than to help thousands of anonymous ones, Stalin's quote.
Exactly. The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic. Our empathetic circuits are more easily engaged by concrete individuals and mirror neurons.
The neurons that fire both when we do something and when we see someone else do it.
Those are the ones. This discovery sparked huge excitement. Could these be the neurological basis of empathy, imitation, understanding others' intentions? It's tantalizing, but the direct link to empathy in humans is still more speculative than proven.
And altruism helping others, is it ever truly selfless?
A perennial debate. Even seemingly selfless acts often have hidden benefits. Remember the dopamine release when we act charitably or reduce inequality. Feeling good about helping others might be our brain's way of rewarding and reinforcing pro-social behavior. So maybe it's a mix of genuine care and subtle self-interest.
Okay. Symbolism. You said that's uniquely human.
Our mastery of symbols, language, metaphor, that seems pretty unique. And it leads to some strange things. Our brains often confuse metaphorical purity with literal physical purity.
The Macbeth effect. Lady Macbeth trying to wash the damn spot of guilt away.
Exactly. Studies show people actually have a stronger desire to physically clean themselves after recalling an immoral act they committed. They might choose an antiseptic wipe over a pencil as a thank you gift. If they lied verbally, they might prefer mouthwash. If they lied in writing, they might prefer hand soap.
Wow. Our brains literally want to wash away metaphorical dirt.
It seems so. But this symbolic confusion has a deeply dark side. It can be exploited for dehumanization. Propagandists have known this for centuries. They use disgusting metaphors to describe them, calling people vermin, insects, rodents, disease, cancer.
Engaging that disgust response.
Precisely. It engages the insula, a brain region involved in literal disgust, like towards rotten food. By linking a group of people to disgusting things symbolically, it makes violence against them seem less like harming fellow humans and more like exterminating pests or filth. This was used horrifically in places like Nazi Germany and the Rwandan genocide.
It's terrifying. But the flip side, can symbolism be used for peace?
Yes, the same power can be harnessed for reconciliation. Conflict resolution often fails if it only focuses on practical issues like land or resources. You have to acknowledge and respect the sacred values of the other side, the things they hold non-negotiable, often rooted in identity and symbolism.
So you need symbolic gestures.
They can be incredibly powerful. Think of King Hussein of Jordan attending the funeral of assassinated Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a huge symbolic act. Or after decades of conflict in Northern Ireland, the eventual hard-won handshake between Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, former bitter enemies. These acts resonate deeply.
And things like Truth and Reconciliation Commissions.
Exactly. Like in South Africa after apartheid, they often prioritize collective truth-telling and national healing symbolic repair, sometimes over individual punishment, recognizing that moving forward requires more than just legal accountability.
Okay, last big area. Justice, free will, and how neuroscience fits in.
A really challenging intersection. The legal system has grappled with mental states for centuries. The M'Naghten Rule from 19th century England was an early attempt to define legal insanity, basically. Did the person know what they were doing, and did they know it was wrong?
But neuroscience complicates that, right? Shows the biological underpinnings.
It does. It challenges the idea of a clear line between sane and insane, or the idea of a little homunculus driver in our head making perfectly free choices. It pushes us towards thinking about mitigated free will, acknowledging biological and environmental constraints on our choices.
And this has had real-world effects in law.
Definitely in juvenile justice. Understanding that the adolescent frontal cortex isn't fully mature was a major factor in the U.S. Supreme Court banning mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles. The science show they're neurobiologically different from adults in terms of impulse control, planning, and susceptibility to peer pressure.
And outside the courtroom. Things like motivation.
Carol Dweck's work on mindset is huge here. Her research shows that praising children for effort, you must have worked really hard, is much better for motivation and resilience than praising innate intelligence. You must be so smart. Praising intelligence fosters a fixed mindset. Kids become afraid to tackle challenges where they might fail and not look smart. Praising effort fosters a growth mindset. Challenges are seen as opportunities to learn and get stronger. It's about the process, not just the outcome.
So our understanding of the brain impacts how we should parent and educate.
Absolutely. But we need to be cautious. While severe frontal lobe damage might predict certain behaviors, most complex human actions are incredibly hard to predict from brain scans alone.
So neuroscience doesn't just tell us who will commit a crime.
Not even close. As the philosophers Joshua Green and Jonathan Cohen famously put it, in one sense, neuroscience changes nothing and everything about legal responsibility. It doesn't change the fact that we need to protect society from dangerous individuals. But it should change how we think about responsibility, blame, and punishment. It pushes us away from purely retributive justice, they deserve to suffer, towards more forward-looking approaches focused on prevention, rehabilitation, and managing risk based on scientific understanding.
Like how we stopped prosecuting people for having epileptic seizures once we understood the biology.
Exactly. It's a historical parallel. We need to integrate scientific insights into our views on behavior, even when it challenges long-held intuitions about free will and blame.
Okay, wow. That was a lot. Bringing it all together then.
It really is a lot, but hopefully what you've seen is this incredible cascade of influences. From the brains firing milliseconds before an act, to the hormones from hours ago, the experiences from years ago, the culture from centuries ago, and the evolution from millennia ago, it all converges on that single moment of behavior.
Biology, environment, culture, evolution, not separate buckets, but totally interwoven.
Deeply interwoven, constantly interacting, shaping each other, shaping us.
So what's a final thought to leave us with? Something to mull over.
Maybe a few connected thoughts. First, it's great if your frontal cortex helps you do the harder, better thing. But it's often even more effective when that better thing has become so automatic, so practiced, that it isn't hard anymore. Virtue as habit.
Right. Make the good choice the easy choice.
Second, yes, brain plasticity is amazing. Change is possible at any age. But intervening earlier to prevent the damage from childhood adversity is always better than trying to fix it later.
An ounce of prevention.
With many pounds of cure.
Yeah.
Also remember that brains and cultures co-evolve. What seems morally obvious to us today might have started as some nonconformists' radical reasoning generations ago. Progress happens.
And hormones and genes aren't destiny.
Never. Hormones modulate, they sensitize, they lower thresholds for environmental triggers. Genes create potentials, possibilities, vulnerabilities, but environment and experience write much of the story. They aren't inevitabilities.
Love and hate aren't opposites.
Neurologically and emotionally, intense love and intense hate can look surprisingly similar in terms of arousal and obsession. Their true opposite is indifference.
And adolescence. It's key.
It highlights how the most uniquely human part of our brain, the frontal cortex, is shaped least by genes and most by experience. It's all about context.
Okay, one last one.
We draw lines all the time. Yosem, sane, child, adult. These boundaries can be useful, even necessary. But we should always remember their inherent arbitrariness on what are often smooth continuous. And maybe the most crucial point ties back to dopamine and fear. We're often more driven by the anticipation of pleasure than the pleasure itself. And you simply cannot understand aggression without understanding fear. They are two sides of the same coin.
So looking back at history, at conflict and reconciliation.
Yes. Those who don't remember the times things went right, the extraordinary truces, the heroic interventions, the incredibly hard-won reconciliations, or those who don't recognize how understanding the science of our behavior can help us make those positive outcomes more likely. Well, those who don't remember or recognize these things are condemned to be less likely to repeat these essential reasons for hope.